today. I think this is an important experiment for us to have a panel of presenters, and this panel is going to basically review this book. We're having another session next week at this time to follow up on what we're talking about today. They're going to present this book chapter by chapter, as you see there in the bios, and then we'll have a chance for a few questions, but I thought that next week it would be important for us to come back and say, well, what do we do now? You know, if you agree or disagree with what comes out today as far as capitalism is not a good thing for Earthcare, and they'll describe how that is. Well, then if you agree or disagree, we'll talk about that, but also if you agree, what do we do? If you disagree, why? So we'll have next week to do that and start with today as well. And over there on the table, there's going to be, there's a sheet of paper that you can put your email, and your name if you would like to have a review of this book, and also would like to share any information that you have, and we can respond to you and support you in your endeavors as well. So that's something that you can do. I hope you will. Again, Levis has come out of the 9 interfaith communities here have come together to advocate the education regarding Earthcare, and we are the ones that speak on behalf of not only the First Presbyterian, but the other ones here at the City Commission, the county, and we've been to the state as well. So it's good to have all of you here. So with no further ado, I just want to start off with the description that you've already seen, but we're going to look at the book, give it critique, and Hickel presents a case for rethinking our relationship with growth and consumption. His advocacy for degrowth offers a transformative vision for sustainable food. So we're going to start off with Carol Estes. Again, take a look at this and you'll learn all about it, a little bit anyway. Okay, Carol. And we'll just hand the baton as we go back and forth.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. It's my job today to take us from the 14th century to the present day in 6 minutes. So strap in for a whirlwind tour. First, let's look at where we are right now. As many of you already know, we're living in an era of mass extinction. Around 1 million species are currently at the risk of extinction. But this time it's not a meteor hitting the Earth that's causing the problem, it's us humans. How did we get to this dark place? According to Jason Hickel, author of Less is More, which we hope you will read and discuss with us. We'd love to hear what you think. It happened because most human societies, especially ours, are now organized around an economic system that demands constant growth. That is capitalism. To trace the origins of modern capitalism, we need to look back at 2 cataclysmic events in medieval Europe. England in particular, where the conditions for sustained capitalistic development were best. During the Middle Ages, most peasants lived on manorial estates or manors. They owed the lord of the manor a specified number of days of labor annually in exchange for his protection, and they could not work anywhere else without his permission. But they did have some legal standing. They were entitled to plots of their own to farm and to farm the commons communally with other peasants. So in this diagram up here, which is very hard to see, you'll see the big green area is the commons on this. This is the map of a manor. And then the little speckled area, yellow area in the far this side top is forest. So those are the areas that peasants were allowed to farm. But in 1348, the Black Death struck. That's the first of the two cataclysmic events. By the time it ended, 2 years later, it had killed 50% of England's population, emptying the countryside and, importantly, creating a severe labor shortage. Suddenly, peasants found that they could demand higher wages and greater mobility. Landlords, however, were not happy. So in response, Parliament capped the wages at pre-plague levels and restricted laborers' ability to move between employers, undermining their newfound economic power. As a result, in England and throughout Europe and Asia, peasants revolted in great numbers throughout the 15th century. The second cataclysmic event was enclosure. And this was actually more of an extended campaign than a single event. Enclosure was the removal of the rights of peasants, the rights they had formerly held over farmland and parish commons, and the creation of large new fields enclosed by hedges, walls, or fences. These new fields were reserved for the sole use of individual owners or their tenants. So between 1604 and 1914, over 5,200 enclosure bills were passed by Parliament, affecting approximately 6.8 million acres of land in England, which equates to roughly 1/5 of the country's total area. And England still has a problem resulting from this. An 18th century poet wrote, "The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater felon loose who steals the common from the goose." So those peasants who formerly depended on the land had no choice but to sell their labor in order to survive. Their life expectancy sank to levels not seen since the Black Death. In Manchester, for example, it fell to 25 years, and the word poverty came into use for the first time. In short, and I'm quoting our author here, the first few hundred years of capitalism generated misery to an extent unknown in the pre-capitalist era. By 1832, enclosure had completed the destruction of the medieval peasant community and created fertile ground for the growth of capitalism. The final ingredient necessary for capitalism to survive was natural resources, access to free and cheap natural resources. But that meant capitalism would require a new relationship to the land, one built on principles of extraction, commodification, and ever-increasing productivity, or in the language of the time, improvement. But as it happened, natural resources were available for the taking in England's vast network of colonies, and the new capitalists took freely. How did they justify this exploitation? With ideas from philosopher René Descartes and Immanuel Kant, as well as the Calvinist idea that wealth is the proof of salvation, and the Christian notion that this world doesn't matter, only the world that lies beyond. So in summary, quoting again from our author, the rise of capitalism in Europe hinged on commodities produced by enslaved workers on land stolen from colonized people and processed in factories staffed by European peasants who had been dispossessed by enclosure.
I'm David Collins, emeritus scientist from KU. After introducing the conditions and societies that open the door for development of capitalism and the philosophies and doctrines that were used to justify the resulting concentrations of wealth and power, Jason Hickel proceeds in chapter 2 to discuss how growth, his iron law of capital, created the rise of the juggernaut, the overwhelming worldwide capitalist economies of today. Hickel cautions that as consumers who benefit from capitalism, we easily overlook inconvenient truths and accept reassuring lies, like, the environment is so huge, my pollution won't hurt anyone, or climate change is natural. What I consume doesn't matter. In 2009, a group of earth scientists published a report from Stockholm University highlighting the growing risks from human pressure on 9 critical global processes that regulate the stability and resilience of life on Earth. For each of these processes, they identified levels labeled planetary boundaries, beyond which continued growth poses a significant risk for large-scale, abrupt, or irreversible environmental changes. When Less is More was published in 2021, Hickel reported that the latest data indicated we had already shot past 4 of these planetary boundaries, where trends updates available online indicate that by 2023, 6 of the 9 boundaries were transgressed, increasing to 7 of the 9 last year. Those transgressions represent environmental impacts, but capitalism also creates some devastating social impacts. Capitalism leads to increasing wealth and income inequality. With their accumulated wealth, capitalists can influence governments to advance their personal interests over society's needs. Governments find themselves under pressure to cut workers' rights, slash environmental protections, open up public land to developers, privatize public services, whatever it takes to please their campaign donors. Sound familiar? Rather than meeting clear human needs and social objectives, growth in profits is pursued for its own sake. Continual growth of profits within capitalism requires growing production with increased consumption of inputs, whether raw materials from the earth, cheap labor, or government favors. It also generates growing inequalities in the wealth of nations. To limit adverse local environmental impacts, high-income nations choose, in large part, to extract resources from the global south. Fully half of the total materials they consume are extracted from poorer countries, and generally under unequal and exploitative conditions which drive ecological breakdown. A pioneer environmentalist once said, capitalism can no more be persuaded to limit growth than a human being can be persuaded to stop breathing. Hickel concludes, we need to reorganize the economy so that it operates within planetary boundaries to maintain the Earth's life-supporting systems on which we depend for our existence. Our survival depends on it.
Fukushima. Chapter 3 is, will technology save us, or sustainable growth is an oxymoron. It's known we must cut global emissions in half by 2030 and totally by 2050. That's 25 years to undo what took 250 years to build. But capitalists say we don't need to abandon fossil fuels because technology will save us. Things like renewable electricity, recycling, and efficiency to avoid ecological breakdown. Pro-growthers claim that clean energy will allow green growth, but it's not possible to transition fast enough if we continue to grow the economy at existing rates. With the economy doubling by 2050, there will be a doubling of energy demand, emissions, material extraction, deforestation, and farm soil loss. Green electricity would need mineral extraction to increase by tens of millions of tons of copper, lead, zinc, aluminum, and iron, not to mention rare earth minerals. Electric vehicles will need an additional 70% increase. Silver demand, which we know is skyrocketed in price, would require 130 more silver mines, each 40 square miles in area. The clean electricity build-out requires oil, coal, and gas, making the terms clean mostly meaningless. Then after 30 years, the so-called renewables must be rebuilt, burning all that more oil, coal, and gas to build them. Currently, less than 9% is recycled due to cross-contamination or spoilage, making more extensive recycling technically impossible. Even so, to achieve better recycling, it must be managed by the producer. This would limit or eliminate their capital accumulation, contrary to the investor's wishes. With resource depletion, mineral and energy extraction moves to more remote and ecologically sensitive sites. This results in higher costs and less efficiency. The Jevons paradox says more efficient energy and material use increases consumption. Lost my place here. Rather than achieving the same level of benefit by using fewer resources, humans crave for increased benefits while using the same amount or more resources, not less. Why haven't 30 years of international climate pledges kept us under 1.5 degrees Celsius? Because they're one, voluntary, and two, far-fetched. One such far-fetched tech solution is called bioenergy carbon capture and storage. It calls for growing trees on 2/3 of the planet's arable land so that they would absorb carbon dioxide, burn the trees for power, and then bury the carbon dioxide. Trees for power would take 15,000 carbon capture plants, an unproven technology. And the plantations themselves would cause 7% more biodiversity loss, exacerbating the extinction crisis. Growthers also push geoengineering to reflect sunlight back into space. This is the ultimate hubris, to presume we can control and subdue a living planet. And also, geoengineering is addictive. Once begun, it can never stop. Because the heat from the accumulated carbon dioxide would dramatically rebound. And solar radiation management will do nothing to slow ecological breakdown. Ocean acidification, deforestation, mass extinction, or soil depletion. Those boundaries that some of the boundaries David mentioned. Politicians desperately avoid the imperative of radical emissions reductions. Green growth proponents resort to outlandish speculative technologies and clever accounting tricks to maintain the illusion that capitalism can expand indefinitely. They are willing to risk everything just to keep GDP rising.
I don't know if people have seen what we're talking about. This is the book we're reviewing, and it's a very interesting book because Jason Hickel, he is from one of the little colonies that South Africa produced, Swaziland, and he lives in London. He's a Fulbright scholar. This is a Penguin book. This is a very challenging set of histories that a lot of us don't know. And so that's kind of why we were so struck by it that we felt we needed to share this, because it is a very challenging set of beliefs that, or he's challenging a lot of our basic fundamental myths that we believe as part of our economic system. And so it's a worthy challenge to it. And so chapter 4 is what I'm covering, the secrets of the good life. There we go. In this chapter, Jason Hickel looks more carefully at whether there is a link between a growth in GDP and well-being, and whether there are dynamics that are more important than GDP. Economists and policymakers tell us growth is responsible for extraordinary improvements in welfare and life expectancy that we've witnessed over the past few centuries. We need to keep growing in order to keep improving people's lives. It's a basic assumption that we have. If we abandon growth, we abandon human progress itself, is in the background of our lives. But the data shows us something very different. Progress depends not on growth itself, but on what we are producing, whether people have access to essential goods and services, and how income is distributed. Past a certain point, more GDP is not necessary for improving human welfare at all. Human progress was not from capitalism-driven growth in GDP, so much as it was sanitation and public health measures. These were adopted not due to growth-oriented capitalism. They actually came out of worker demands being met due to workers and women earning the right to vote and forming unions. So then they got a voice in the process. The increase in social power for the workers resulted in better public health policies, the spread of vaccinations, public education, public housing, better wages, and safer working conditions. Subsequent research has backed this up. The greatest predictor of life expectancy is basic sanitation and access to universal health care, including child vaccinations. After that, access to education, especially access for women to education, is the most important predictor of life expectancy. As the ecologist Herman Daly has put it, after a certain point, growth begins to become uneconomic. It begins to create more filth than wealth, as inequality and political instability, stress and depression increase with income disparity. Feeling connected to the extended family, to others in the community, to the lands, and to the land leads to increased longevity, as is evidenced in Costa Rica, which is materially poor, has a GDP that sometimes does not grow at all, but has communities with some of the longest lives in the world. We can flourish without growth. Growth in GDP does not translate to improved access to improvement in the lives of workers. U.S. GDP has doubled since the 1970s, but real wages have dropped and poverty rates have raised. The GDP of the U.S. is near the top of the list of countries, but life expectancy is only in the top 20%, with countries with much smaller GDP having better life expectancy than the U.S. Bottom line, the system is set up to concentrate wealth, period. And while there is some effort to trickle down some of the wealth to those unable to participate in that system, the demand for growth to further concentrate wealth is the cause of ecological crisis, specifically the climate crisis. Aggregate growth, where rising waters lift all boats, is causing sea level rise. There is enough fat in the system. Fossil fuel subsidies are currently at $5.2 trillion and military spending at $1.8 trillion, enough to fund the transition to renewables and meet human needs with existing technology. We know how to do this. Robert Kennedy, Sr., when he was at KU, said, "The GDP measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile."
Okay, as you can see, the next chapter is Pathways to a Post-Capitalistic World. You understand, GDP measures a bunch of things. If there's a disaster and you spend a lot of money repairing from that, that adds to the GDP. If you have a farmer who's self-sufficient, whatever, a little producer, if he loses his farm, goes to work in a factory, that adds to the GDP, whereas before he didn't, so he wasn't producing. So it's really a bad measure. And capitalism also is basically like cancerous cell growth. I mean, it's unlimited growth for growth's sake. And that's basically what the earth is happening. It's happening to the earth and us on it. So we need a different kind of economy, not based on GDP. New economy based on ecological sustainability and human well-being. And this actually looks familiar. It'll look like a true market economy where people produce and sell useful goods and services that satisfy human needs at fair wages with little waste and ecological impact. So to achieve this, we must reduce material and energy use. Okay. So to do this, he has outlined several steps. The first is end planned obsolescence. Okay, things are made to break now, you know. One example, light bulbs used to last 2,500 hours, and the industry decided it could sell more of them if they reduced their life to 1,000 hours, and it worked, you know. So the solution to that is legislate long warranty periods, okay, make them make things last longer if they can, and then under warranty. And also the right of repair of independent service people. You have John Deere now, a lot of people are complaining because they're waiting months for only John Deere people to actually repair their farm machinery, you know, real problem. So the next one is reduce advertising. So most ads use psychological manipulation to get people to buy things they don't really need or want. And like the fashion industry, the clothes are so serviceable, but people throw them away because new fashions are fashionable. And then also a shift from ownership to usership. We use tools sometimes, maybe very rarely, and that could be used in a neighborhood community. For instance, lawnmowers. I know people sometimes attached to their lawnmowers, and cars in certain areas could also be used that way. And then there's an extensive amount of food waste. Global food waste is estimated to be about 30 to 50%. So solutions could involve these expiration dates that are on food. Doesn't mean the food's bad. It's just that it says good buy, I mean the best buy if you use it before this date. So they to make changes in that, make stores donate food to charities. And one example in South Korea, they actually banned food waste from landfills, and they have special compost bins that charge a fee according to weight. So that takes care of that a little bit. And then step 5, reduce ecologically destructive industries such as fossil fuels and the beef industry. So to do this, I think, first of all, you can end government subsidies for these industries and reduce the extraction rates of fossil fuels from the ground. I mean, that's important. If you just limit how much is coming out of the ground and used, That's the main way to do it. Otherwise, people will fiddle around with stuff. And then, more importantly also, is expanding the commons. We heard about how the commons was enclosed, and there's a push where you have to decommodify public goods instead of making everything a commodity. I mean, we rely on air to breathe, but if somebody could, make a profit off of it, it would be, terrible. So this has happened throughout the years. Like in Douglas County now, the proposal to have our, rec centers, recreation centers, to be charged for them instead of having it as a public good. I think that's going in the wrong direction. So also he mentions the idea of forgiving debts. This global south, because many of the countries have been indebted by these giant projects that people have come in, and dictators have gotten payoffs to do these things. Dictator goes, and the country's still left with these debts to pay off forever. So the idea of maybe if we could forgive some of these debts somehow. Anyway, those are just some major ideas that are involved with that.
Okay, sorry, this is so long, I'll wrap it up here. First of all, though, I do want to say it has been so fun being part of this Gladys Book Club and having these discussions about these important things. And we've read books like All You Can Save and Braiding Sweetgrass, and highly encourage people to join a book club. The final chapter of Less is More sums it all up in the title, Everything is Connected. He quotes Colombian fishermen who say, we're not the defenders of the river, we are the river. Everything is connected. We emerged from and are part of the earth. 6,000 years ago was the Austronesian expansion as mainland Asians discovered the South Sea Island. In order to survive, they had to swap the mainland ideology of expansion and unbridled extraction for an ideology of integration. They adopted animism, a philosophy that perceives everything as being alive and an essential part of the web of life. Plants and animals have souls, agency, intentionality, and self-consciousness. The world has no hierarchy of being. Plants and animals are relatives, children to be nourished, appreciated, and honored, even including inert resources. What a thrilling way to experience life, like a portal into an enchanted world, hidden right in plain view. In our current world, easily accessible resources have become limited. They come at a high price, much like the South Sea Islands eventually discovered. Dualism emerged in the Renaissance, objectifying nature with man separate from nature. Others called it the thingification of nature. Carroll explored Descartes' dualism, and the author did so again in this final chapter. But along came a hero, Italian philosopher Spinoza, who contested dualism and paid the price with excommunication. He believed that while God and humans and nature might seem to be fundamentally different kinds of entities, they are really just different aspects of a single grand reality, a single substance governed by the same forces. Spinoza is now recognized as visualizing something much closer to reality, where God can still exist in all his glory as part of his creation. The potential for a sixth mass extinction event in our planet's history clearly shows us the contrast between capitalist values and animist values. We witness the disconnected nature of growthism, where GDP and colonialism are accelerating the possibility of that extinction. I have to hope, to have any hope, We must plan for after capitalism and see ourselves once again as part of a broader community of living things. And we need to develop an ethics that sees resources as gifts and not as something just to be taken. We need to run the economy in a steady state, extracting no more than can be regenerated, maybe even localizing things, and to waste no more than can be safely absorbed. Finally, in the beginning, he relates the story of a world-famous Brazilian photographer. And I'm going to set out some pictures that he took. He became sick by what he saw colonialism doing around the world. And he adopted a life of reclaiming wasteland and restoring it to its original form. The point is, we must move from accumulation to decolonization. Today, our whole civilization is a colonization project that should be a decolonization project. Thank you very much.
Well, we have a few minutes to solve the problem, and next week. So we need to have you make comments or questions. Comments, hold them to maybe a limit of some sort, but this panel would be glad to respond to you. Do we have anything out there? Yeah, go ahead.
The author seems to...
Wait just a minute, go ahead, give that to you.
Is this on?
It's at the bottom.
There's a power switch. No, there's a power switch there. See it? High tech, here we go.
The author seems to vilify capitalism, but the alternatives, he doesn't make the case that alternatives to capitalism, socialism, dictatorships and so forth, would make a difference. Or does it? Have you not talked about that? So that's my question. Is there evidence that the economic system is really driving this, or is it more human nature and so forth?
One of the things that he says early on is, when we try and summarize a book in a very short time, it's difficult. One of the things that he talks about is the marketplace, where people produce things, they sell things at a profit, and they sustain themselves. That is not what we're talking about. That is old as the hills, and it's very sustainable, and it is the right economic model to use. The thing that capitalism is this incessant. You have to increase 3%, 4%, 5%, 20% every year, and there's no stopping of that, and that's what is challenging. So that's an excellent question, and it's something that we don't really have a lot of time to talk about in a lot of details.
Yeah, I think the question is perfect, because this is usually people think is that you hear anti-capitalism, they've got to be socialist or communist, and that's not the case. He makes a clear distinction. It's condemning those things as well, dictatorships and everything. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is somebody like, say, a local business like Ernst Hardware downtown. I don't know how many of you been here that long, but he had generations of a hardware store down there. His grandfather owned the whole block. But anyway, he just had this little hobby hardware store. He made money at it. But I doubt if he was, it was to contrast that, but he provided goods and services to people in a community and was responsive to that. It's like a regular thing that we would think capitalism does. But capitalism creates scarcity and other things like that. And the main thing what it does is, it has to have perpetually increasing growth like a cancer cell. You can't just be happy making a nice profit. Profit's fine, there's nothing wrong with making a profit, right? Made a profit, you have to stay in business, you make a good profit. But if you don't increase that profit, always, year after year, you're a corporation, and you're beholden to your shareholders. And they're gonna complain, they're not gonna invest in you. So that's the problem, it's structured so that they have to go for continuous growth at any cost. And it's not only, the natural world, but it's even, human resources, human capital. Look at the way that's even framed. It's not people that we interact with, they're resources, just like trees. So that's the distinction that really makes it good.
There was one more question here. Can we just keep moving to questions? I saw this hand first, and then we'll go back.
Okay, it's very interesting that this writer's from Britain, Great Britain, because I can't remember his name, probably over 50 years ago, there was a writer from Britain, and his slogan was "Small is beautiful." Is remembered?
E.F. Schumacher.
What?
E.F. Schumacher, yes.
Okay, because at that time I thought that was, and this sounds very similar to. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't really have.
Yeah,
I just
right.
comment on somebody else, also from the same country.
Yeah, E.F. Schumacher is got a society that continues. Do you have a question?
Just a quick
Yeah.
Has your book group discussed or talked about the most recent extraordinary celebration throughout the country at reaching 50,000 in the stock market? And the implications that has for all of us. And how do folks who have retirement funds, it looks like a lot of us here are retired, in that dynamic, and the impact of all of that. Have you talked about that?
Okay. We haven't talked about it exactly, but what we have talked about is how enmeshed in this system we all are. I live off Social Security, and a big question for me is also what money I have, I want to save it for my children, instead of giving it to the society as a whole. So I think the hard question for us has been, how can we arrive at enough? And that is something that capitalism, it's not even in the equation. Isn't there enough, and a point that's enough? And you take the people that have hundreds of billions of dollars, why do some people get to have that? And other people are starving. And so I think we're caught in the midst of a system that it's hard to extract yourself from. And we have discussed that without coming up with an answer. It's a tough thing that we're now at the peak capitalism. How do we get out of it? How do we alter it? Yeah.
I have to go to choir rehearsal. Just one last observation. Your opening statements about the common ground. And then I have the same dynamic going on in my life with regard to, I want to leave, something for my children. And that mentality I've got to deal with, because that is contrary to common ground.
Yes.
And I think it's very contrary to common ground thinking. So I just wondered if anybody else is in that dynamic, and how do we do that? I think Hillary Clinton tried to deal with it when we talked about how our children are raised.
Takes a village.
Can I say it again?
It takes a village, you
It takes a village.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation, I really appreciate it.
There's also the idea that our human nature is by nature competitive and selfish, that point too. And he really looks at that a little bit and is like, well, is it just the structure of the way corporations are? And he analyzes it in different ways, interviews different people, students at different surveys, saying that would you be willing to sacrifice this or whatever for the common good, if it was. And it turns out that most people would be willing to do that. It's just that the way the corporate setup is, so I don't think it's inherent in human nature. See, that's the whole idea, like with Darwin, of the competition, tooth and claw and all that, that's been ingrained. And there's an aspect of that we can see. However, there's also an overriding understanding nowadays that altruism and cooperation is really a major source in structuring a biological communities. So I don't think that that's an inherent idea in our nature. So it's just a corporate structure set up that it has to keep going to make profit.
I think another important thing to recognize is that capitalism isn't natural, it's something that we establish. And unlike, I'm trying to think exactly how to put it, there are sort of rules of behavior if you're a capitalist that can be changed. For instance, the idea that you have to focus on profits without considering what social needs are can be changed. You can put requirements on capitalist corporations. And in addition, when things like the stock market hit 50,000, not everybody is benefiting from that. The vast majority of people in the United States don't get much out of that 50,000 number. The major stockholders in companies do get a whole lot out of that. And so that's just, it's a structural thing within how things are organized, and that's part of what has to be dealt with.
Back here.
What's our time limit, by the way?
15 after.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, it probably does require some sacrifice. I mean, if we're facing an extinction event in the sometime near future, our immediate concerns become a little bit dwarfed. But those are really hard things to think about, and particularly for our species, we're pretty immediately focused. And I think this book does a pretty good job painting the picture of what.
Floyd has a question over here.
I have no question, I have a statement. I'm one of the few that's working, and I am held to each year to increase my profit for the company. Now, that's good for me, but where are we at in the world in relation to that? Because it's the company wants more every year, and those at the top get a lot more. It's a very unique situation. So reading the review on this book can really stir up the brain as to what do you do? Do I just quit work? I don't need any more. Is that going to help anything? What will it do with my children? What am I going to leave them? Ponder all of those little things and say, wow.
Thank you.
And I think that this book raises more questions than it answers, but I think these are questions worth asking. And that's why we decided we would go out on a limb and talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah, next week, I think we're gonna come back to that. And again, I'm gonna ask you to sign up if you'd like to make a comment, and we'll bring forth next week. And also we'll give you a review of this book that addresses some of these same questions. Michael?
Yeah, just to clarify, there's a fundamental difference between an economic system and a governance system. it's a false dichotomy to contrast capitalism, which is an economic system, with socialism, communism, things of that sort, which is a governance system. The governance system, the communist governance system in Russia and China are causing the same kinds of ecological disasters that capitalism is here. So it's not a governance system we're talking about, it's a financial economic system. And we've been kind of touching on lately, and we're going to dig in our book club, dig into more deeply, I think, is what I've heard called bioregional economics, which basically comes down to local economics as opposed to top-down global economics. It's that top-down power in the hands of a few to control the whole picture as a global economics, as opposed to bottom-up, person by person, store by store, institute by institute, local control of credit unions, cooperatives, small businesses, private banking system, things of that sort that we can control locally and take the power away from those, rich folks, the extremely wealthy folks, the Elon Musks of the world, take the economic power away from them.
And I think
Could you mention your tool sharing?
Okay, yeah. One of the dynamics of a local economy would be a sharing economy. Mutual aid is a term that some people call it, that instead of dog eat dog, we work with our neighbors, we help our neighbors. We expect that our neighbors will help us. As a result, that it's a reciprocal process, mutual aid. And one of the institutions, I guess I could call it, that's emerging from that in the sharing economy is a tool library. Look it up online. It's amazing. I just discovered it myself in the last year or so. There are tool libraries all over the country, all over the world, of people that share, and Hank touched on this earlier, share high dollar kinds of things that you might only use occasionally. And why would everybody need to buy canning kettles? We could share those. Or lawnmowers, we could share those. Or even cars, as Hank mentioned. So there are neighborhoods and groups here in Lawrence who are gearing up to try to start a tool library. And that's just the beginning. There's lots of possibilities if we think in those terms.
We're going to come to a closure again, if you would. Please do put your name and your email there, and that we'll be able to contact you with also some books that might present some more alternatives. I just want to say real quick, for me, let's get into the weeds, and so some people understand, I think theologically we've got some real issues going on. What has perpetuated this? It is, fortunately, I think we have roots in Spinoza. Spinoza is Jewish tradition. We are a part of that. And there is within the Jewish, Islamic, and Christian tradition a whole understanding of us being connected, being interrelated with the earth. That has to come to the surface. And so faith communities hopefully will bring those to the surface and talk about them, because it's not easy. We've been raised in a culture that divides us, and unfortunately there's also is a theology that just focuses on the afterlife instead of both and, or having what's called panentheism. So I'm hoping that we'll have a discussion next week that will not only explore some of the practical ways, but maybe we can dig a little bit deeper in the weeds in terms of who we are as faith communities. So thank you again, and they're going to be around here for a while. You can quiz them, grill them, whatever you need to do. And it's really been a pleasure to have all of you here. Thank you.